Welcome back. It's been a little while since we did a video. We are going to have a shift in our direction here. We started talking about church cookbooks and community source cookbooks like the Pennsylvania Grange cookbook and the recipes that are in those, and maybe it would be fun to look at those recipes that are 40, 50, 60 years old and see what they might be like to cook now based on what we know now about cooking. And so I started looking through, this is a Pennsylvania Grange cookbook. This one's from the early 1970s. This one is Pennsylvania State Grange, and please note the housewife with the pie on the cover. This one is from 1950. I've got this one. This is, the cover's ripped off, but this was compiled by the Faith Lutheran Church in Richfield, PA youth group. I've got this one by the same church except the women's group called the Mustard Seeds. And then we have, this one is the McDonough United Methodist Church, United Methodist Women, McDonough, Georgia in 1975. I started flipping through them and I was looking at all the different recipes and how you can see recipes that used to be trendy and maybe we don't make now. One that jumped out at me was chicken chow mein. I don't know about you, but that's not something I've eaten in a long time. But I discovered in this cookbook that my grandma had a recipe for chicken chow mein in this cookbook. And I had forgotten that she made it, but Mary Losh was about as far from Asian as one might be in central Pennsylvania, in the heart of Pennsylvania Dutch country in the 1970s. In the Pennsylvania cookbook from the State Grange from 1950 says it calls for half a bottle of Chinese sauce. What is Chinese sauce? I think they mean soy sauce. And what size bottle? We don't know. So anyway, I thought it'd be fun to make. Chow mein recipes are always next to chop suey recipes. I did a little bit of research, and those are both dishes that are not really Chinese. They were sort of made by Americans, and earlier than, this is 1950, earlier than that, according to my research, maybe even the early 1900s, chop suey was a thing. But we're gonna add mushrooms to this recipe, and we're gonna see how it tastes. So stick around for the end, because at the end, we're gonna give this recipe a Meg score, and you won't wanna miss that. So let's get started. Okay, we're gonna make this in a wok, which seems appropriate. It's a Teflon wok, which seems even more appropriate. So we are going, this recipe, we're working off of the Pennsylvania State Grange cookbook from 1972. Okay, prepared and edited. A lot of good farm women put a lot of good recipes in here. Chow mein, 1/4 cup butter. That's half a stick. Melt butter in hot skillet, add meat and sear quickly without burning or browning. Neither burn nor brown your meat, says Mrs. Richard A. Nye from the Fulton Grange number 66. I appreciate that she advises not to burn the meat. That's helpful. Then we add meat and sear quickly without burning or browning. A lot of these recipes call for a can of bean sprouts. In our grocery store, we went to the Giant in Gaithersburg, Maryland today, and they have a, quote, Chinese food label on aisle 9 or 10. But there were no, there was no bamboo shoots. There were only water chestnuts. I think everybody is cooking Asian food this week. So we just got the chopped suey vegetables. So this has, let's read it. Water bean sprouts, celery, water chestnuts, onions, carrots, bamboo shoots, red bell peppers. Has a little MSG in it. I think it'll work. I mean, it's mainly bean sprouts. Mrs. Richard Nye's recipe says, melt butter in hot skillet. She probably didn't even have a wok. Probably didn't even know what a wok was. Add meat, stir, and sear quickly without burning or browning. And here we go. We are using a pound of chicken thighs because that's what we had. Her recipe calls for, and I'll read it, it calls for a cup and a half of diced cooked turkey or any leftover meat. Apparently Mrs. Richard Nye made her chow mein from whatever meat she had. My grandma's recipe in the other cookbook called for pork. I think she used pork. I don't actually remember eating chow mein with pork at her house. I do have a vague recollection of eating chow mein, but I really thought it was chicken. I don't know. It could have been venison for all I know. So we are gonna neither burn nor brown this meat. We're just gonna quickly sear it. I feel like Mrs. Richard Nye from the Fulton Grange number 66 would have liked having a wok in 1970. My grandma got an electric wok, and she actually taught me to cook chicken stir fry in probably the late 70s. It was, I was probably 10 or 11 when I showed an interest in cooking, and my grandma was all over it. And she, I think I still have somewhere, her Chinese cookbook. She had a cookbook that came with the wok. And then she bought me the same electric wok that she had. And that was fun. I love that. Mrs. Richard Nye, we don't know what her first name is. I suspect it's Lois. It might be Betty. It could be Violet. We really don't know, because in a lot of these old cookbooks, the women, and by the way, it was really overwhelmingly women who contributed recipes, would list themselves as Mrs. So-and-so with their husband's name. Kind of a nod to an earlier time when a woman's identity was built around the household and her being a housewife and who she married. So Mrs. Richard Nye, maybe, you know, Reba, Sarah, Virginia. We don't know what her name was. She was Richard's wife, and that's what we know. Okay, that is neither burn nor brown. And it says add onions and fry for 5 minutes. So here go the onions. And I think because Mrs. Richard Nye's recipe does not call for mushrooms, but 3 other recipes called for mushrooms, I'm going to add the mushrooms now. This is the only modification I'm making to Mrs. Richard Nye's recipe. I'm adding about a cup of mushrooms. Rolling over in her grave. Mushrooms? Richard hated mushrooms! She added them. Well, I'm adding them. Richard didn't like them. Richard didn't like mushrooms. He wasn't much fond of celery, but she puts it in here. And he ate it because she made the dinner. Okay, 5 minutes. Just to fry for 5 minutes. Okay. Add flavoring and thickening ingredients. Stir lightly. Cook 5 minutes. Taste delicious on Chinese noodles or toast. Toast? Toast? Mrs. Richard Nye put chow mein on toast, y'all. Okay. Okay, this is we're almost 5 minutes in, and now Mrs. Richard Nye says, add celery, salt, pepper, and hot water. Okay, she wants a teaspoon of salt. So I know I should measure. I'm not going to measure. Sorry, Mrs. Richard and I. A little pepper. She has an eighth, I think it's an eighth of a teaspoon of pepper. Celery. Cup of celery. And hot water. There's some hot water. In it goes. I think because she wanted, if I were making this like today, I would have put the celery in earlier because I kind of want it to cook, but she, I think, wants to be crisp. Richard likes it crisp. So this is going to now cover and cook for 5 minutes. We don't have a lid for this wok, but Mrs. Richard and I didn't have a wok, so she didn't have a lid. So I'm just gonna let it cook like this for 5 minutes. Let's see what happens. So this has been cooking for 5 minutes. We did not have a lid on it. Now Mrs. Richard and I says, add drained bean sprouts. All right, that's the chopped Suey vegetables. With all apologies to Mrs. Nye and probably to Richard too, who didn't like carrots. But this has carrots in it. Oh, it's got water chestnuts in it though too, which I don't know if Richard liked, but I love water chestnuts. They're good. The next thing is, it says, add flavoring and the thickening ingredients. So what that is, that's 1/3 of a cup of cold water, 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, 2 teaspoons of soy sauce, which is basically no soy sauce. And I'll just remind you, this is supposedly a Chinese dish. There's 2 teaspoons of soy sauce, but that's all I put in it, and a teaspoon of sugar. So we're gonna add this and stir lightly and cook 5 minutes. She says, taste delicious on Chinese noodles or toast. We already know that. Cook less than an hour. She doesn't want you to keep cooking it. So here's the soy sauce starch water mixture. Put it in, that'll thicken that right up. For about 5 minutes. Everything's 5 minutes. That's easy to remember. I have to say I like the addition of color. There's some tiny red bell pepper bits in the can of chopped Suey vegetables. Oh, look at it thickening up. Ooh, that's gonna be good, I think. There's a bamboo shoot. I don't know if Richard liked bamboo shoots. I feel like maybe that's why Mrs. Richard just called for a can of bean sprouts. I don't know, but I think if she had tried a can of chopped Suey vegetables, Richard would have been surprised and delighted. So this is supposed to cook for 5 minutes. It's already getting pretty thick, so I'm gonna turn it down. And then we're gonna try it when it's done. Mrs. Nye said we could serve it on rice. We don't have bread to toast right now. I guess toast would do in a pinch, but here it is. We're gonna try it and we're gonna give it a Meg score. Oh yeah. Mrs. Nye, despite the permission you gave us to serve it on toast, it's an Asian-ish entree, and so we served it on rice. I think the celery and mushroom flavor is what reminds me of kind of how my grandma made it. It was comfort food. I think that Mrs. Richard Nye, whatever her first name was, nailed it. Okay, Meg score. I'm gonna give it a score. These are my criteria. Is it easy to make? Yeah. It was really easy to make. Her recipe was easy to follow. It doesn't have a lot of ingredients. It's easy to follow. It's definitely easy to make. So I'm gonna say 5. On my scale of 1 to 5, I'm gonna say it was 5 easy to make. and it was pretty fast too. Does it taste good? I'm gonna give it a 5. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not spicy, but the flavors are balanced. You can taste the onion and the celery. You know, it's good on rice. It has a good mouth feel, as they say. Yeah, it tastes good. I like it. I'm giving it a 5. Would you take it to a church potluck? Yeah, I would take it to a church potluck, but you know what I would do is I would probably, if I were taking it to a potluck, I would take a 13x9 glass dish and I would layer rice on the bottom, and then I would put the chow mein over it, the chow mein stew, and then I would put the crunchy noodles on top right before serving time. Yeah, I'd give it a 5 for church potluck. Yeah. And then the last one is, would you make it again? Yeah, I think I would. Should I make it again? So he's saying not heavy rotation, but on a night when you just want something easy to make and you want comfort food and you don't want spicy stuff that's gonna give you reflux later, you know? So, okay, so with that qualification, I'll give it a 4 out of 5. I would totally make it again. Thanks for watching us make Mrs. Richard and I's chow mein from the 1970s. Hope you try it. Hope you like it. If you do try it, please leave in the comments how it turned out for you. And if you have recipes, like tried and true family recipes or recipes from a church cookbook from the 70s or 80s or 60s that you would like us to try, I'd love to see them. So either leave them in the comments or send them to us at moremustbebetter@gmail.com and let us have a look, and we'll let you know if we try it. Thanks for watching. Bye.